Hey everyone, welcome to STEM League. My name's Sarah and I'll be leading your first web dev workshop. This workshop is meant for beginners who want to better understand how HTML and CSS relate to each other. We'll be making a game called Pop-Up Penguins that will help us get some practice with divs, HTML, CSS, and even JavaScript. This workshop is based off of a game made by Google Creative Labs open source project called Coder. In your first lesson, Intro to Web Development, you learned about the basics of HTML and CSS. HTML uses tags to create content for the page. One of these tags is used to make images appear on the page. We'll be using images a bunch in Pop-Up Penguins because all of our penguins are going to be images. CSS is another language we'll be using to style our page. In Pop-Up Penguins, we'll use CSS to do a bunch of stuff, like make our background blue, organize our elements, and make penguins pop up. Besides getting a chance to play around with HTML and CSS, you're also going to see how you can use these two languages to make a game. We'll be taking a look at JavaScript, which is a web development language that basically makes things on our page move. JavaScript will literally change your coding life. But before we get coding, we have to do some setting up. I have some code ready for you in GitHub. Let's take the code from GitHub and get it into your Repl.lt. You probably guessed our first step. Open Repl.lt. Once you're in, create a new REPL by pressing the New REPL button. After you do that, a pop-up should show up that looks like this one. Click the Import from GitHub tab in the pop-up and type in STEM League-Pop-Up Penguins. Now you can click Import from GitHub. You gotta sit tight, it'll probably take a while to clone. Feel free to pause this video, grab a snack, come back, and we'll get started once your file has been completely cloned. When you're ready, head over to the right side of the screen and double check that the languages selected are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. This tells Repl.lt that we'll be using these languages in our REPL and nothing else. Also make sure that under Configure the Run button, it says index.html. Once you've made sure of those two things, you can click Done. This might take another moment. In the meantime, make sure the index.html file is the first file listed in your sidebar. If it's not, your files might not work correctly. In web dev, we always want to run the HTML file. Every other file we have connects to the HTML file in some way, and the HTML file is what we see in the browser. Okay, one more step before we can get coding. Head over to the left of your screen and open up the Repl.lt file. It should say run equals index.html on line 2. If it doesn't say that, type index.html in between the quotation marks. And we are done. Let's run this game. Click the Run button and click the Open in New tab icon to see your page in all its glory. You can pause this video here and explore the code and how it affects what's displayed. Come back when you're ready. Maybe you took a quick look at the files and went, this looks familiar. Or maybe you went, what are these files doing? If you relate more with the second statement, there's no need to worry. I'll do my best to help you in the next couple slides. To try and explain divs, I'm going to call upon my favorite cat, Pusheen. For the sake of this example, all the pushins are an HTML element. You probably noticed in our index.html file, there's a lot of divs. In HTML, we like to use divs to organize our page. Divs are kind of like a box. We use them to hold stuff and organize our life. You can put divs inside of divs, inside of divs, inside of divs, inside of divs. You can also give each of your divs a name. In this first picture, we see a box filled with 3 tiny pushins. I'm going to describe the picture using divs by making one big div and 3 little divs. I call the big div box because it's a box. And I called our kittens kitten 1, kitten 2, and kitten 3 because they're kittens. We'll be using these names in our CSS and JavaScript files, so we want to give our divs names that are memorable and describe what's inside them. In the next picture, we see a different type of box with Pusheen inside it. And in Pusheen's mouth, we see a pizza. The way I describe this in divs is by making the big box, the pizza box, the div that everything is inside of. I made Pusheen the next level div and the pizza inside Pusheen. How do you think this should be organized? Okay, let's hop back into Papa Penguins. And let's look at index.html. Similar to the first picture from the last slide, we have this big div called game holder. This is the opening tag of game holder, and this is the closing tag of game holder. Game holder is a box for our game. If you want to take a minute to understand the code, pause this video and read through the comments in the index.html file. Come back when you're ready. All right, it's time for some CSS. You learned that CSS helps us style elements. Each CSS component is structured like this, with a selector, a property, and a value. The selector does what we expect it to. It selects. It selects HTML elements that we want to style. The property targets a specific trait of the elements we select. So here we're targeting the font size property of all the paragraph elements. Value is the value we're giving our property. So for font size, if you use like Google Docs or Word or something like that, it'll be 12 point, 16 point, something like that. Here we're going to be using EM. EM is basically a fancy font size value that scales the font instead of giving it a permanent value like point does. In this example, EM would make all the key elements 1.2 times their default size. All right, I don't think you can have too many cat examples, so return of the tiny Pusheens. Last time we saw these guys, we were discussing HTML. Now let's think about them and what they might look like in CSS. To access these elements from our CSS file, we need to call their name. I called it the names that we gave them. I called this box, and I called one of the kittens kitten1. I also added colors. You can add colors in multiple ways in CSS. Here I colored brown by just typing in brown, and for this is gray, but this is actually the hex code for gray. You can learn about other ways on W3 Schools. In this game, all of our elements are images. Our penguins are images, and our yeti is an image, and our title's an image. The only thing that's not an image really is our game holder. We'll be using CSS to connect the images to our HTML page. We're doing this by assigning values to the background image property of each of the divs. So what we'll be doing is basically filling the divs with a background, which is the image. If we wanted to, we could even get these images from the web by copying the image link from any image that you want. We'll be talking about this more in Behind the Workshop. The last thing I want to point out is auto. Auto automatically sets the margins of your element. It's good for centering elements on the screen, and for games, it's always good to center elements on the screen. Later in STEM League, you'll learn about Flexbox, which is a really cool way of centering elements on the screen, and in my opinion, a much better way of automatically laying out elements. Whew, that was a lot of information. If you want some ideas about what to do next, stick around for another minute and we're going to go into Behind the Workshop. If you'd rather play around with the code on your own, go ahead and do that. You're free, the code is yours, have fun. Once again, if you want to take a minute to understand the code, pause this video, read through the comments and come back when you're ready. There's a lot of helpful comments in there and there's lots of helpful links. Welcome to Behind the Workshop. After every workshop, you'll have the chance to test out your newfound coding skills by adding some personal touches to the project that you just completed. These are just starting out with their apprentice tasks. And remember, it's okay to feel lost. The more time you spend coding, the clearer it'll become. Just keep coding. We believe in you. All of us at STEM League believe in you. Pusheen believes in you. You can do it. After you've done the apprentice task, try out some master tasks. For some links that might help you with these tasks, look at the comments in the code. Good luck, and I can't wait to see what you make.